Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and what we're talking about is seeking players' feedback. So your Dungeons and Dragons players will have feedback for you as a dungeon master on your dungeon mastering. And communication is key. You're playing a game where people are communicating back and forth while they're playing a game. It's absolutely vital that you get it right. And I find that feedback has changed a lot of things for me as a dungeon master by making sure that I seek it out from my players. Now, this particular screen that I've got up here right now, communication. Before you attack the gazebo, find out what it is. It's not actually a monster, it's a gazebo, right? You sit under a gazebo, you have your lunch, your dinner, your picnic, whatever it is. It's not always what you think it is. You have to actually communicate and find out what it is first. And that's what all of this is about today. So feedback. So a lot of problems can be resolved by actually sitting down at the table, at the game table, and talking to each other. It's a very simple method. And by actually seeking to ask questions about how things are going at your table, particularly about your own dungeon mastering, that will help you, but it will also pull out all of the other stuff. There might be issues between other players that crop up during a game, and those can be talked about, and one of the best places is near the end of a session. Feedback is vital, and how you actually deal with feedback is even more important, because you have to be very careful and subtle about what you're doing, but you also have to be completely transparent. One of the things that I find a little concerning at times is I see people saying, when you give feedback to a player on a particular issue, you should take them off on their own and have a discussion. And to be fair, unless it's something that's incredibly humiliating and personal, I think that's actually the worst thing you can do. I think that your communication about stuff that's going on at your game table needs to be done with the group, because then you're utilizing what's called peer pressure. Peer pressure is very, very useful to you as a dungeon master, not as a weapon, but it will allow you to rectify some of the antisocial aspects of your game, and also to give you an opportunity to see if what's been spoken by one player is actually reflected in a lot of other players at your table. Because if they're all giving you the same message, then there's probably something up, and that needs to be addressed. So as I said, seek and ask your Dungeons and Dragons players to give feedback on your game sessions. And when you do this, ask for that feedback every game session. Every game session you have, ask for that feedback at the end of the game. Keep it pretty brief. I tend to do it during my pack-up. I don't usually set aside time at the end of the game to seek feedback from people, because often you'll find that there isn't a lot to be said, and therefore it's not necessary. But near the end of the session, when I've said, okay, that's it for tonight, I will say, look, tell me, what did you think? Do you have any feedback for me? Don't get crazy. Don't go completely bananas and start typing up survey sheets and giving them out to your players. That's not actually necessary. It's actually better off if you don't do that sort of thing. Okay, don't make it too formal. Also, any kind of feedback that you get from your players that's positive, I want you to hone in on that particular information, and I want you to duplicate whatever you're doing in terms of what they find positive about your game. Those are the aspects of your dungeon mastering that obviously they like, and you want to keep duplicating them, provided it's within social accepted practice. If that's what I mean. Okay. Don't respond to the negative feedback straight away. Okay, it's important that you don't respond to negative feedback straight away. Give it like a week or 2 weeks. Let a bit of time pass before you respond. All you're going to do is to sit there and listen. But you can respond to the positive feedback straight away. That's actually a good thing to do. And keep asking them questions, okay? You'll find that players will probably not give you feedback initially, but once they get familiar and comfortable with you, they'll start to give you feedback, particularly if you keep asking for feedback. One of the things you'll find, if you keep asking, they will eventually get it and they will start giving you some feedback. You can also allow a few minutes at the end of your game session if you like, but I would not allocate too much time. Okay, the idea is to collect very brief, basic information on the game and how things are going. Keep it informal. By keeping it informal, you improve the chances that people will share their experiences of the game, whether they be good or bad, or middle of the road, and it makes it a lot less scary. Okay, that's what I would suggest you do. Don't go and justify your actions. It's not a good idea to justify your actions as a dungeon master straight away. That's actually not constructive at all. All you will do is wind up in an argument. So most of that justification will take place when you're dealing with negative feedback, stuff that you don't like to hear. So don't respond to that straight away. You need to actually allow time to pass for you to process that information so that you can hear their negative feedback on your dungeon mastering and their criticism and allow it to sort of sink in, because quite often I've found that my initial response to a player saying something is very emotional, and that's not a good thing. Okay, but I leave it enough time and then I have a chance to sort of think about it a bit more and mull it over. It makes it a lot more useful to you in your game. Now, this particular scene that I put up, feedback. Now, there's one little picture that says surveys. As I said, don't bother about surveys. But things like comments, how they rate it, results. Look, results don't need to be graphed. Results could be as simple as did they achieve their goal or not achieve their goal. And that can be very, very useful to you. Okay? How well are they progressing through their story? Any kind of advice. Sometimes players will offer advice to you about how the game can be improved. They might even, more than likely, they will offer ideas, some players will, during the game, whether they realize it or not, and at the end of the game. And your response, leave that for now. Remember, everything they're saying is just their opinion. It is not set in concrete. You must allow time to process first. What I want to reiterate right now, make it clear, although I want you to listen to what the players say, don't change your dungeon mastering because of negative feedback. Just because you get negative feedback doesn't mean you need to change your dungeon mastering. The only time you change the way you're dungeon mastering at your game table is unless you see a chance to improve your skills. And it's clear that there's some sort of problem at the table that needs to be resolved. Because please remember that players are not always right. There's a phrase called the customer is always right. When they go into a retail store, the customer is always right. That's actually not true. Sometimes the customer is not right, and they should be escorted by the security guard out that door and never let back. And the same thing can apply to some players. Some players will be rude, some players will be unreasonable, some players will be self-serving in terms of, a lot of power gamers tend to operate this way. They'll be self-serving in terms of what they want to actually see at the table. And that's not unexpected, that's quite expected. So remember, players aren't always right, and frequently they can actually be quite biased. You will find that players who are also dungeon masters are probably going to be less biased because they've sat on both sides of the DM screen, or they've done both. They know what it's like. A player who's only ever played the game but never dungeon mastered will not be quite as versed up on the aspects and difficulty of running the game. So how do you process this feedback? Now there's a feedback loop. So when you get that feedback and you receive it, there's some things that need to actually happen. Some analysis, some causes and consequences. So you look at that and you look at, well, what's the cause of this? What are some of the consequences? Can you create some options or solutions from this? This is why you need time to think about it. Committing to an action once you've decided there's something that can be implemented, that is a solution to the issue. Evaluating your performance, so checking back and asking for more feedback. When you make a change at the table, still asking for feedback and evaluating how well things are going. And this will allow you to discover issues, whether that's self-disclosure or assisted discovery. So you'll discover things along the way. And surprisingly, this can only be achieved by building in a waiting time for you to think. Also time for players to think, okay? Seek and ask for solutions from everybody at your table. So when you start deciding, actually, there's something here that the players talked about and I want to seek a solution to it, don't just rely on your one solitary brain. There are a lot of people at the table with brains who can help you. And other dungeon masters can also offer you solutions. But remember, you shouldn't be seeking solutions and answers to issues that you see or things that you might want to change in terms of your dungeon mastering unless it's tried by the individual. So when you seek advice from a dungeon master, if they haven't done it before, remember, it's probably not terribly useful advice. If they have tried it at their table and it has worked or not worked, then that's more reliable. Remember, that's the thing, that's the benchmark. So this is why I often say do not seek advice for very important aspects of your game from the internet. Like myself, like every internet, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or anything like that, you've got to be very careful about the kind of advice you're getting from those locations, because it's not always going to be hugely useful to you, and it often can be quite destructive. Remember, we can't act and say anything rational if we're emotional, which is why we put in a waiting period for giving feedback on our players' feedback. When we respond to our players, we give them a bit of time. Okay, so those are the basics of feedback. But there are a couple of other things that I really want to reiterate to you before you start thinking that it's all about the players giving feedback. Because there's a really important aspect to this whole thing, and that is, what about the Dungeon Master? Yeah, what about the Dungeon Master? Well, when does a Dungeon Master get to give feedback to their players? So here's 4 basics for giving feedback to your players when you decide you need to do that, because the feedback process should be going both ways. When it's not used as a weapon. So the last thing you want to do is decide to talk about an issue or something that you're having trouble with at the table in terms of the players' conduct or how they were playing the game or what's going on. It might be just because they're late or something like that. It could be anything. Don't bring up all the stuff that you have stored and filed away as a weapon to be used when they start throwing negative feedback at you. That's the last time. Don't pick that time to give feedback to players when they're giving you negative feedback. Now, if they come in every single week and at the end of your game session they're always giving you negative feedback, you're going to have to do it at some point. But be aware, okay, that when things crop up, it's not always the best response to respond straight away. The best time, as I said, for a Dungeon Master to give feedback to players is when they're not emotional. So if you know you're upset, that is not the time to talk about it. Okay, you need to, one of the things I found in my job, and also because my background is psychology, is you can't really get anywhere when people are emotional. They're still caught up in the chemical process that's going through their body. So being able to communicate with them and get anywhere is often almost impossible. So you need to let emotions drop down before you start communicating. Pick times when your players have very little feedback to give. So if they don't have very much feedback, this is a good time for you to give feedback to them on some of the things that you would like to discuss in terms of how they're playing the game, rather than them giving you feedback on how you're dungeon mastering. And finally, really important aspect to feedback, all of the things that I talked about in terms of processing and so forth, in terms of how you should function as a dungeon master with player feedback, applies to players. Now the players won't understand that unless they've watched this video, but the feedback you give to your players, make sure to give them positive feedback and negative feedback. If the feedback you give them is always negative, then that's not going to be very helpful. If you know they did really well during a game session, then point out the things they did really well. And if there are things they didn't do so well, they don't need to necessarily, you don't have to be successful at everything, but if there are things that really stand out that you think really need to be mentioned, and they are negative in nature in terms of what was going on, then certainly bring them forward. But you need to make sure to have a mixture of positive and negative feedback for your players when you give feedback as a dungeon master. That's the best advice I can give you with regard to that. Okay, so where is this leading us to? Actually, this is leading us to one point. This whole video is really trying to give you the tools to deal with everything that would come up at your table, whether you be a player or a dungeon master. So here is a conflict resolution method that I used in my job for many years, and it was really successful. We used it with people who had drug and alcohol gambling issues, criminal activity, come out of prison, and we used to actually call it an encounter. Now, we're not talking about a combat encounter. We just used to call it an encounter, and we would write it down on a piece of paper, and then we'd get them to speak from the words that were written on the piece of paper, so all the ideas were clear. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do it this way, that you write things down, because there has to be a point where you sort of let go of that very rigorous method. Remember, the people I was working with were coming from a very different walk of life, okay? Their lives were much more traumatic, and you're only hopefully not part of that world, okay? So conflict resolution works this way and can be very effective if you pay attention to what's going on. And it works like this: acknowledge the person first. So when person gives you feedback, acknowledge them. Acknowledging just means acknowledging who they are. Often we would say, look, I hear what you're saying, Fred or Bob or whatever it is. So we would use their name so that they understood that we knew who they were. Now, I know that sounds really, really strange, but it's actually a form of acknowledgement by making sure that your first sentence incorporates their name. It's actually incredibly powerful. Listen to what they say. So it's important that you don't interrupt them. Okay? Really important that you don't interrupt them. Allow them to speak. Speak their mind and say nothing. Because as soon as you chime in and start to justify or speak about whatever the feedback is, and it usually, even whether it's be positive or negative, you've kind of cut them off and you haven't allowed them to actually deliver the entire message. Okay? So make sure that you listen to what they say, you process it, allow that time to process, okay, and then reflect it back to them. So once they've said what they had to say, and you can leave a pause, you can have time to think, okay, reflect back to them what they're saying to you or how they are feeling. So look, maybe when somebody says, look, it's really frustrating for me that we're only able to use Xanathar's Guide to Everything and the Player's Handbook and none of the other resources that are now official content. All you have to do in terms of reflecting and repeating what they say is say, look, Bill, I hear what you're saying, I understand, and you find it frustrating that I'm only allowing you to use Xanathar's Guide to Everything and the Player's Handbook for building your character. I understand, that could be frustrating. That's it. That's all you're doing. All you're doing is reflecting, okay? And then you might want to offer a solution, but I find that those are actually better dealt with further down the track. If it's something that you feel isn't too heated, then maybe you can do it straight away. But often it's better to leave a little bit of time and then come back to that later on. I will often say to my players, okay, let me have a think about that and I'll get back to you on that next week or the next time we play. One of the best ways you can deal with feedback, whether it be positive or negative, is following this pattern. Acknowledge the person, listen to what they say, don't interrupt, repeat or reflect back what they said, and then later on offer a solution. When all of the emotions and the chemicals in your body have settled down. And that's it. It's really no harder than that. It's actually what I was using in the last job. We used to use this technique all the time to get through quite a lot of really hairy situations. So hopefully you found this video helpful and informative, and if you did, great, that's good news. If you find this sort of content useful or helpful, I would suggest hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. If you want to support my channel, you supported my channel by watching this video, and hey, I really do appreciate the people who have showed up today. I know it's going to be late for a lot of you, showed up and watched this video along with me. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Now, if you want to continue supporting me, then watch more of my videos. Watch more of my videos, that's really helpful too. I don't do Patreon, but down in the description you'll find affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon, where you can buy stuff online. I get a small commission. You pay exactly the same price. Just go through the link, buy what you like. It doesn't matter what I've linked to. Just go through the link and then go from there. Okay? And look, if you have any questions and feedback, which I can see in the chat there are, and I will respond to you in a few seconds. Otherwise, if you're not part of the live chat, then I would suggest putting down your comments down below. And if there's anything you want to talk about with regard to seeking feedback from players, then I might have missed something. There might be something else that needs to be discussed. I might be wrong. I am just offering my technique for dealing with feedback from players and how I give feedback to players as a dungeon master. Okay? And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.